What's going on, Nasty Nation? It's Nasty, and in today's video, I'll be going over how Sword Art was able to hit rank 1 while playing support. If you do go on to enjoy this video or find it helpful, then be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. That should just about do it for this introduction though, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Now, before we get started, I do think that it is important for anybody who may not know who Sword Art is already to know a little bit more about him. So for those guys who don't know, Sword Art is a pro player that used to play in the LPL under Su Ning, and he made it all the way to the World's Finals in 2020 last year. Most recently though, he signed a massive contract with TSM for around $6 million, which is why he's playing in North America these days. So with that being said, even though in this video my goal is going to be to break down exactly how he was able to find so much success in solo queue, what it is that he was doing that allowed him to win so many games and climb to rank 1, you do just have to keep in mind that one of the main reasons that he is in fact rank 1 is because he's an insanely good player. Not just any player can make it to rank 1, not just any player can make it to the World's Finals or sign a contract for $6 million. So again, keep in mind he's just really good at the game. So even though I would hope that this video can be helpful to those of you guys who are watching and maybe potentially help you guys find some success like Sword Art was able to find in your own solo queue games, you just have to remember that Sword Art is making a lot of this look a lot easier than it actually is. However, that's not to say that other players haven't been able to do what he has accomplished as well. In fact, I've already made videos in the past for a couple other support players who were able to hit rank 1. Neither of these players were Worlds finalists, nor did they have a $6 million contract. So if you're looking for a video that has similar context but it might be a little bit more relatable for you, definitely feel free to check out those videos. I made videos for both when Stunt and Mickey X hit rank 1, so feel free to check those out once you're done watching this video. I'll leave a link in the description for both of those videos. But now with all of that out of the way, let's actually get started and take a look at one of the big factors that played a part in Sword Art's climb to rank 1. For starters, in order to put this video together, I had to do a lot of research and I had to watch a lot of footage from Sword Art's solo queue games, and one of the very first things that I noticed about Sword Art was his champion pool. Now, when people usually ask me about champion pools, I usually tell them that in order to climb in solo queue, my personal advice that I would give to people is to stick to a small champion pool of about 2 to 3 champions. I'm a firm believer in the idea that it's better to be great at a few things rather than good at a lot of things, and I think that having a smaller champion pool will help accomplish that idea. Sword Art, on the other hand, kind of does the exact opposite of this. At the time of making this video, at least, Sword Art has 13 champions currently played on the season, and although a few of these champion picks are outliers with just 1 or a few games played on them, for the most part, he seems to have a pretty large champion pool. Now, you do have to keep in mind, though, that Sword Art is a professional player currently playing in the LCS under TSM, so practicing multiple champions is most likely part of his job, and that doesn't necessarily mean that this is an intentional strategy that he's implementing to help himself climb in solo queue. And if it were still up to me, I'd still recommend sticking to a smaller champion pool, but Sword Art has already shown that regardless of his intentions, having a larger champion pool in solo queue can work just fine, but only if you're capable of playing multiple champions at an extremely high level, which, as he has shown, he is perfectly capable of doing. All in all, regardless of the reasoning behind it, Sword Art is able to play a lot of champions, and that is a huge factor in how he was able to climb to rank 1. Another factor that I noticed about Sword Art's champion pool was the playstyle all of these champions had in common. Sword Art's 8 most played champions at the time of recording this video are currently Pantheon, Rell, Maokai, Alistar, Leona, Thresh, Sett, and Bard. Some of these champions are better early in the game, and some of these champions are better later in the game, but one thing that they all have in common is their playmaking ability. Now, the fact that this champion pool that Sword Art currently has consists of playmaking champions could definitely just be because of the current meta of the game revolving around tank supports, but I actually don't think that's entirely the case. If Sword Art really was just trying to be a meta abuser, I don't think Pantheon would be his most played champion on the season. I think what Sword Art is actually trying to accomplish with these picks is just having as much of an impact in the game as he possibly can, and making sure that if his team wins or loses, that he is going to play a big part in that. I personally think that other styles of support like mage supports or enchanted supports can also be really fun to play, but one thing they lack is the potential to make plays and have carry potential in your games. When you're playing a mage support like Brand or Lux, you can at least try to carry the game through putting out a lot of damage, and when you're playing an enchanter support like Nami or Janna, you could at least try to carry the game through helping your team survive longer so that they can do damage, but at the end of the day, both of these playstyles can be really hard to pull off if your team falls behind. One thing that's great about tank supports with CC heavy kits is their ability to make plays for their team even when they fall behind. If you fall behind as a mage, that means you're doing less damage, and if you fall behind as an enchanter, that means you're healing and shielding for less. But if you fall behind as a tank support, you may be a bit squishier and easier to kill, but the CC that you have in your kit will be just as strong, which means you can still make plays for your team and help your team get back into it. I've been told a lot by high elo players in the past that CC is the key to winning games, and I think that Sword Art is a perfect example of how true that can actually be. Every single one of his most played champions is a CC heavy champion, and that allows him to have a lot of potential in his games, and that's why he's able to win so many, and that's why he was able to climb to rank 1. The next thing that I want to discuss regarding Sword Art's playstyle, another thing that I noticed when looking over all of his games in solo queue, is that he has a very high priority on winning the lane phase. As I mentioned previously, I have made videos like this in the past when I looked at Mikyx and when I looked at Stunt, and both of these players were very roam heavy players. They didn't spend a whole lot of time in lane. Yes, they could still get advantages in the lane phase, but more times than not, when they got a lead in the lane phase, they would try to go to other lanes and extend that lead elsewhere. Sword Art, on the other hand, doesn't roam hardly at all. And when it comes to roaming as a whole, this is something that used to not be all too common in past seasons, but in recent seasons, it's almost become a standard aspect of the support role. So to see someone like Sword Art, who's the most paid player in all of LCS right now, and the rank 1 support not roaming, it kind of goes to show how much he's able to impact the game even when he's not roaming. Personally, I like the roaming style a lot more. I would consider myself to be a player with a similar playstyle to someone like Stunt or Mikyx, who also roamed a lot during their climbs to rank 1, but Sword Art's heavy focus on the lane just goes to show that there's a lot of different ways to approach the game, and they can all be effective depending on what your strengths are as a player. So even though I fall into the category of players that like to roam a lot, Sword Art is the type of support who likes to stay in lane as much as possible and play aggressive as much as possible. He likes to push himself to the limit, and he doesn't change his playstyle at all even when he falls behind. He continues to play aggressive and try to make plays because, again, he wants to play a large factor in whether or not his team wins or loses. For example, I actually recently watched him play a game of Seraphine against an enemy Blitzcrank. At level 1, he was hooked and he died under tower while he was trying to poke. Honestly, it looked like a simple mistake, and afterwards, if I were him, I probably would have came back to lane and played a lot safer, but instead I watched him come right back to lane and continue to play just as aggressive. He would actually play so aggressive, as a matter of fact, that on a few occasions, I would see him have a single minion in between him and an enemy Blitzcrank, and he would still go for trades, knowing that he was capable of positioning well enough behind the minion in order to dodge the hook when it eventually came. That same game, actually, that he was hooked and died at level 1, he ended up going 0, 3, and 13. He got the first tower, he ended up winning lane, and eventually he ended up winning the game. While most players might have tilted after dying level 1 and continued to play the rest of the game extremely passive, Sword Art did not change his playstyle, continued to play aggressive, and won the game as a result of it. And while the Blitzcrank might have been able to get an early lead and roam around the map to help other lanes snowball, as most roaming supports do, Sword Art prioritized spending the majority of his time in lane, punishing the enemy ADC while he was alone in lane, and thus snowballing his own lane in order to ultimately win the game. Again, this is just another really good example of how Sword Art is able to play the game his own way, not really care too much about how most players play, and win the game playing his style. And finally, one last aspect that I noticed about Sword Art's playstyle is his willingness to consistently sacrifice his own life to make plays for his team. Now, I understand that solo queue is something that you queue up for as an individual, but the second that you get into Champion Select, you now find yourself on a team with 4 other random players who hopefully have the same goal that you do, which is to win your game. I think that one issue that most solo queue players have is their inability to actually look at their team as a team. As much as you may hate to admit it, League of Legends is a team-reliant game that you simply have no shot at winning if your entire team isn't on board. Most people will approach the game playing as an individual, playing selfishly, trying to get themselves ahead instead of helping out their team, and making solo plays rather than making plays as a team. Sword Art, on the other hand, is constantly working with his team, willing to make a play and set himself further behind, so long as that means he's putting his teammates further ahead. I've always been the type of player who thought that I could just maintain a high KDA, not die too much in my games, and I thought if I was doing that, then I was doing enough for my team. But after looking at Sword Art's average KDA across all of his champions, I soon came to realize that there really is nothing wrong with dying a lot in your game as long as you're making every single death count. Obviously, you don't want to just run it down every single game and continuously force bad fights for your team, because that's not really making plays for your team, that's just running it down. But I do think that Sword Art sets a great example for all players and proves that sometimes risking your life in order to help benefit your team can actually help you climb a lot more than taking the safe route or playing for KDA and kind of just hoping that if you're not feeding, that your team will be able to carry. Overall, I think it's a great message to all support players out there to try to make a difference in your game, have an impact, be a support for your team, and try to carry the game that way. Well, alright then, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap up the end of this video. Again, I hope you guys went on to enjoy this video or find it helpful, and if you did, then be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. I really appreciate those of you guys who did stick around to the very end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.